So thanks everybody for coming out. I always like to tell a little bit about myself because I'm not usually what people expect when I show up. People think that I'm maybe something different than what I am. So a little bit about myself. I didn't actually grow up in Texas. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I grew up in the middle of an Oklahoma oil field. I was accustomed to drilling and drilling activity whenever I moved to Texas, and so I think that's important for everybody to know that I was not inherently against this whenever I moved into it. It was being around it that kind of opened my eyes to what was going on. So this is a view from Google Maps. There's just going to be a few wells, right? Every one of those little white spots are all pad sites. And Dish actually is not fully developed. This area right here is not fully developed. There's going to be more of those little white dots in there by the time the field is fully developed. And if you were to go to Google Maps and just type Dish into the Google Maps and look at the satellite image, you would see this. This hadn't been photoshopped. You can go to Google and look at this right now. If you actually panned north, you would see it's much more dense than even this is. So there will be more than just a well or two. Now when I talk about Dish, people always ask me, well, where exactly is Dish? So Dish is located in North Texas. It's about 25 miles directly north of downtown Fort Worth. If there's any NASCAR fans, I could see the Texas Motor Speedway from my front porch in Dish. For those of you that don't know, I no longer live in Dish. I have moved away about 18 months ago. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Dish, a very small community, very small incorporated community, about 2 square miles. At the last census, it was about 200 people. There's a community that's kind of around Dish, so the entire community is around 500 or so. Dish was originally incorporated as Clark in 2000, and we changed our name to Dish in exchange for Free Dish Network. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. It actually made some pretty big news because we got more media coverage than when Apple released the iPod. So it was a pretty big deal for them as well. Very small budget, around $70,000. And we are dead center in the center of the Barnett Shale, which is a 5,000 square mile geological formation that's in the general north central Texas area. Tight gas reservoir shale, which is I believe what the play here is as well. Has to be hydraulic fractured to produce natural gas. Here's some numbers that are a little bit aged, almost a couple of years old. There's about 14,574 wells, and there was about 3,000 more permitted. So in that 5,000 square mile area, the industry reports say that there could be 100,000 wells. So if you can imagine what that would be, maybe you could do the math on how big your formation is here, and then you could kind of do some rough math to see how many wells are going to be here. And then maybe you could take a sticky tab and put 500,000 or so sticky tabs on your map, and that'll give you some idea of what you're going to be looking like in 10 or 15 years. Dish was actually located where Mitchell Energy developed the hydraulic fracturing that's used in the shale plays. Now, you'll hear the industry say that they've been fracking for 60 years, etc., and they have been doing variations of that. But the slick water hydraulic fracturing that they're using in the shale plays was developed in the late 90s by Mitchell Energy, and it was about 15 miles to the west of Dish. And so there's been some drilling activity in that general area since the 90s. Now, of course, after 2000, they started doing the horizontal drilling, and that's when the boom really took off. It became much more cost effective. This is what we have in Dish. We have, we're kind of Grand Central Station. All of the pipelines in the Barnett Shale kind of come together in Dish. And so we have 11 high-pressure natural gas pipelines. These are very large, 36-inch lines. And to facilitate those lines, we also have a dozen natural gas compression stations, compressor engines. And 5 companies have installed them. We have metering stations. We have wells. And then we've got wells that were drilled just outside our corporate limits. When DISH put in its drilling ordinance, the industry went just outside of our corporate limits and started drilling more extensively. And so as you can see, pretty much every aspect of the process is either done inside of DISH or just outside of DISH. So the gas is drilled, it's treated, it's odorized, it's metered, and it's pressured out into the system. So when it leaves DISH, it's ready for your kitchen stove. This is the compression facility that I was just describing. The corporate limits of DISH go something like this. And so these facilities are outside of our corporate limits. They have no interaction with the town. These are inside the corporate limits. You can see that they're inside buildings. They look a little more aesthetically pleasing than this mess. And so in Texas, the local municipalities have the authority to permit wells. Unfortunately, with pipelines and facilities such as this, you're very limited on what you can do. You can make them put it inside of a building to dampen the noise. You can make them paint it a neutral color. You can make them put a fence around it with some bushes, things like that. But that's about the extent of what you can do because you're preempted by the state. Many states are taking away local authority altogether, and the state of Texas has tried that just about every legislative session. Fortunately, they only get together every other year, so we only have to fight it every other year. But I don't know how it is here. If you take away local control, then your local municipality has no control over what happens. Literally, a permit could be issued to drill a well here in the center of this auditorium. And it's some bureaucrat at your state capitol that's stamping that off. It's nobody. They're not going to do any research to figure out where the stuff should go or where it's not. So what does 11 pipelines mean to a small community, a small growing community like DISH? Well, each one of those carry an easement that you can never put anything on. So you take a 50 or 100-foot easement, depending on the size of the line. That's a pretty extensive swath that goes across DISH. And that's property that can never be developed. You can't plant a tree on it. You can only plant shallow-growing crops on it. So if you look at the satellite image and you were to get closer, you would see all of the clear-cut pipelines. And you'll see those all around the United States where this activity is going on. I think you guys have some experience around here with some pipelines. So you can't have a well without having this. You have to be able to get the product treated and get it to market. Has anybody heard there's just going to be a fire hydrant sticking up? You've got to have this in order for this to get the product to market. Otherwise, there's no sense in doing it. So, who wants this in their backyard? Because when this gets going, it's going to be in somebody's backyard. One of you is going to have it. So in the state of Texas, they have what they call permit by rule. So if you don't reach a certain emissions threshold, all you do is fill out a permit, send it in. As long as the check clears and all the squares are filled, you get your permit. Nobody ever comes back and double checks. You just get your permit. So instead of that being one facility, It's 5 facilities. 5 individually permitted facilities. So individually, each one of them are below that threshold. However, collectively, they're well above that threshold in some areas. These are the companies. Anybody know who Enbridge is? Energy Transfer is a pipeline company. Atmos is actually a pipeline distributor. They sell gas at the city gates. And of course, you guys know who Chesapeake is. And Crosstex is another pipeline company. And so each one of these were individually permitted, and you can see the equipment that they have installed. So after we brought this up, and this was brought to the attention of the state, they actually changed some of the permit by rule regulations, where you have to take into account some of the things within a certain radius. And it's some loose improvements, but it's better than it was. Unfortunately, this would be grandfathered in, so it wouldn't help the people in Dish. So the first thing that happened when this moved in is you could see the size. These are 3,000 horsepower engines. They make a lot of noise. I lived about 1,000 feet or so from the facility, and it would sound like a diesel tractor sitting in my yard running 24 hours a day. So we started to get some improvements. They started to put in some sound walls. We started to kind of get the noise down a little bit. As the processing equipment started coming in, it started to smell. The odor got stronger and stronger. Now, natural gas doesn't come out of the ground as the cleanest burning hydrocarbon. It has to go through a process that removes all those impurities. And that process is what they were installing. That right there is a glycol dehydrator that removes the impurities. They were dumping it overboard into our air, and it stunk really bad. It would get to the point to where you couldn't really be outside and enjoy being outside. You know, it'd be outside and it smelled. Why do you move out to the country, buy your dream home, and then have this show up in your backyard? Now you can't use it for what you purchased it for. It's not what you purchased. I mean, it's completely different. Before I move on, anybody see anything strange about that picture? Look at those trees. As this smell started to get worse and worse, anybody see a fence line around here? You see those trees built up real nice and thick where you can't even see the other side of the fence line? That's what that looked like. Once the compressor moved in, basically from fence line to fence line, all the trees started dying. These are the ones that are left, but there's others. You can see stumps and sticking up, and some of them are laying down. Look in the background. All those are green. Maybe there's something more to this odor, huh? So I complained and wrote letters. Nobody would listen. Finally, I put enough pressure on. We started getting some media coverage. So the industry came out and decided that they were going to do an air study. They were going to find the source of that odor and they were going to fix it. Now, take into account, anybody in the industry knows a glycol dehydrator is going to stink. They make equipment for it called a B-Tex condenser. Anybody know what B-Tex is? Benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. They make equipment specifically to control those chemicals on dehydrators. So they know where the odor is coming from. If they don't, they're really incompetent. So they did a study. Their idea of a study was that they put a methane detector in the back of a little SUV and drove around town for 2 hours. Said everything was fine. This was a quote. No natural gas leaks were found that would be detectable to the human nose. It was all a figment of our imagination. If you did a public information request in the state of Texas for all complaints coming from residents of Dish, Texas, you would be carrying around 2 boxes of stuff. There's hundreds of them. We complained and we complained and we complained. It was all a figment of our imagination. So, we decided that maybe we should do a study. Maybe we should look into this. And so we did our study, and we spent 15% of our little budget. Ours came out a little bit differently. Laboratory results confirm the presence of multiple recognized and suspected human carcinogens in the fugitive air emissions present on several locations in the town of Dish. That's what ours said. Everybody knows what a carcinogen is, right? Causes cancer. So ours came back a little different. So, once we did our study and we released our results, the state of Texas decided that, well, maybe we should get up there and get involved. Most people don't believe that the state of Texas came out and did testing to help the citizens of Dish, but rather they came out to protect the industry. So they came out and did a bunch of testing. And I have all of the test results are out on the table. Please don't take them, but you're more than welcome to look through them. So they did some testing. Oddly enough, they found almost the exact same thing. In some areas, an area just outside of Dish, they found stuff that was just off the charts that made what we found in Dish look pretty good. So then the industry decides they're going to do a study. Right? They coordinated everything. They did a study. And I got those results out there too. You can look through them. Strangely enough, found the same thing. So, you have our study that finds these chemicals in some exceedances. You have the state study that finds same chemicals in some exceedances. You have the industry study that finds the same thing. Matter of fact, the industry study found astronomical levels of formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is produced through the combustion of natural gas. All those compressor engines, they're run on natural gas. Happen to be next to a compressor station. Of course, they couldn't determine the source of it, even though the facility is permitted to release a certain amount of formaldehyde. No idea where it came from. So our study said, I think we got a problem here. The state study said, we found a few problems. We're working with them to fix it. We'll keep studying. The industry says, see, we told you, everything's fine. If you look at the lab results, and they're sitting right out there on that table, you'll see what I'm talking about. How much benzene do you want to be exposed to? How much benzene do you want your kids exposed to? How come I don't have any say-so in that? A little bit more about our study. There was a total of 16 chemicals that were above the effect screening levels. Everybody know what effect screening levels are? Effect screening levels are a level that is determined to be a safe limit of exposure. So, for example, benzene is 1.4 parts per billion for long term, and it's 180 parts per billion short term. So it can be quite a bit of a difference. That is based on an occupational setting, though. It's an OSHA standard. So it's a 35-year-old male that weighs 150 pounds, whatever that standard is. It's done through occupational testing because they're not going to expose children to benzene and things like that to see how much they can take. So if you're in a different classification than the 150-pound, 35-year-old male, and you know, when I started this, I was the 150-pound, 35-year-old male, and I'm almost 40 now, so this has been going on for a while. So I used to say it was me, but I'm not even in that category anymore. So if you're a senior, pregnant mom, child, you have any sort of immune deficiency or anything like that, it's going to be different for you. There's really only one way to tell. So, now this stuff's going to be away from homes, right? It's not going to be right up next to people's houses. It's going to be out in the country. Not going to be right next to somebody. This is a friend of mine that I came to learn to know through this process, and his name's Tim Ruggiero. He was on 60 Minutes. He's been real active. He moved out in the country, bought 10 acres. Wanted to have horses. He's got a young daughter. I'm going to have horses for his daughter, etc. And so he's signing his lease paperwork, or his purchase paperwork for his home. And there's a form you fill out that says, I acknowledge I don't own the mineral rights for this property. So he asked his realtor, what does that mean? Well, it means if you're digging in the yard and you hit oil, then it's not yours, it's somebody else's. Oh, okay. So this was taken from his kitchen window. That's 300 feet to the dot, to the center of the wellbore. So he travels a lot, so he went away on business. His wife left for the day. Without notice, they came in, cut down his pipe and cable fence, bulldozed 4 of his 10 acres, and built a pad site for 2 gas wells. Maybe that's a little bit more than what that realtor told him, huh? Maybe just a little bit more than digging in your garden and hitting some oil. So that was a picture outside of his kitchen window for about 6 weeks or so. This is an aerial view. So you can see, this is his property line here. And you can see how much of his property was taken. Now, has anybody ever seen a well site? Seen what that looks like? I have some pictures out on the table outside. You might grab one of those. Don't take it though, because those are all I got. And you can kind of see an aerial view of some well sites. So there's this pit, right? And the pit was here. And so as they're drilling, the waste gets put into this pit. Now in the state of Texas, you don't have to line the pits. So they're unlined. And it's very rare, but every once in a while we get a snowstorm. And it just so happens that this waste pit, we got a snowstorm, and I think you can actually even see some of the remnants of the snow in some of the areas. The waste pit overflowed, so it flowed over the rest of his property. So there's a bigger piece of his property that won't grow grass right now. He also has moved. There's a picture of his daughter's playground. And so when Tim purchased his property, he paid $250,000 for it. He put a significant amount of money into it. He seeded his pasture, which they bulldozed. He put in a pipe and cable fence, which they cut down. And then he did some remodeling to the house. Prior to the drilling, it was on the tax rolls, and you can go to Wise County Tax Assessor's office, and you can look this up. Look up Tim Ruggiero. It was on the tax rolls for $350,000. When he moved, it was on the tax rolls for $73,000. So this is a condensate tank. This video is taken from a FLIR video. Can everybody see that? There's the hatches, there's the vent. Those are volatile organics coming out of there. You wouldn't be able to see that with the naked eye with a FLIR camera. You can see volatile organics. And the gas finder camera is designed to do just that. It's not a heat-seeking camera. You'll see a different color for heat. And so the industry will say that's just steam, but it's actually volatile organics that have the same consistency as our air study did. So once moving from Dish, I formed a nonprofit organization in conjunction with Tim, and we do testing for people who can't afford to do testing on their own. We have got some significant improvements in Dish. Things are better than they were. Certainly wouldn't say they're good by any means. But we got that because we had data. And unfortunately, the areas that are typically targeted at least first are either your government lands or your lower income areas. And so a lot of the people who are being affected don't have the means to get the data that they need. And so there's a little bit about shale test. We've been doing quite a bit of work in Pennsylvania. And so I really think that we're going to be growing pretty soon. I think you'll be hearing more about us. We're working on getting all of the results up on our website at shaletest.org. And once we get that up there, then you can kind of see what we're finding in different parts of the country. And so I moved from Dish in March of last year, so it's been about 18 months since I moved. And has anybody seen the movie Split Estate? It's an interesting movie. So we're sitting there with my wife watching Split Estate one night, and it came out just before Gasland did. And all of a sudden, everybody starts talking about having nosebleeds. Everybody that's in this movie that lives in the gas fields are having nosebleeds. All of a sudden we start thinking, you know, my kids are having nosebleeds. So that made us start thinking about it. I always say, once you know, you can't not know. So my kids began to get nosebleeds more frequently, and they were in the middle of the night. They're two boys. They're 7 and 9 now. They started getting nosebleeds in the middle of the night. Not when they were fighting or wrestling. They just wake up with nosebleeds. So then we started noticing that the times when the odor was the strongest, it seemed like it was always strongest at night, I guess maybe because the wind dies down, that they would get nosebleeds in conjunction with those strong odors. So the state of Texas also installed a permanent air monitor. And so we could, you know, I wouldn't say that it was accurate by any means, but you can kind of tell what the typical flat level is, and you can see spikes. So we're seeing spikes in these chemicals in conjunction with the odor and in conjunction with the nosebleed. And so, as much as I wanted to stay there, we had to move. I mean, we just didn't have any choice in the matter. You don't want to be sitting there having that conversation with your kid's doctor. And so we moved. And of course, someone's going to stand up and say, well, I got nosebleeds all the time when I was a kid. I turned out fine. So we moved 18 months ago, not once. Not one time have they gotten nosebleeds in the middle of the night. You decide. What would it take for you to walk away from your dream home? You know, we did a few things besides wrestle with natural gas companies in Dish. We were building a community there. There's a lot of good people that live there. That was the only home my kids ever knew. Went to church there, went to school there, had friends there. We had to walk away from that. So what would it take for you to walk away from your home, from your community? This is a saying I like. Together we bargain, divided we beg. Everybody kind of gets the feeling of what that means. As groups, you've got to get together. There's several groups on this sponsor list. You've got to get together. You've got to become one umbrella. How many people would that be if everybody nationwide who didn't like what was going on got together and spoke with one voice? How loud would that voice be? What if just the folks in Michigan? Since they've started publicizing this, I've gotten a bunch of calls from people wanting me to come and speak in their community. So there's a lot of people out there that share these kind of views. Sometimes subtle differences in the way that groups approach this will cause them not to work together. So one group decides that we're going to educate people. Another group decides that we're going to try to get legislation. Maybe another group tries litigation. All of these groups really working towards the same goal, working in different angles. Anybody know who Martin Luther King is? Anybody ever heard of him? He had a little battle a while back. And he said that the road to racial justice has to be more than one lane wide. Otherwise, there's going to be a traffic jam, and it's going to take us a whole lot longer to get there. And he was talking about this very subject. You've got to work together. You've got to speak with one voice. Together we bargain, divided we beg. You know, most people don't know who their state representatives are. How many people know who your state representative is? State senator? You need to get active. You need to know that person. And more importantly, they need to know you. They need to know you by face. They need to know you by name. Send them an email. That has an impact. Pick up the phone, give them a call. That has an impact. 10 or 12 of you show up in their Capitol office. They may go into compressor stall because there's probably never been that many people that showed up at their Capitol office. So go there. Who do they work for? You're damn right, they work for you. They don't work for the oil and gas industry. They work for you. You voted them in, you can vote their butts out. Hold them accountable to your values. There's lots of groups out there nationwide that can help you. 5,000 people showed up in Washington, D.C. last weekend for a rally called Stop the Frack Attack. $5,000 people. It was 95 degrees. It was seriously hot there. Humid. This was out in the middle of an open field. 5,000 people showed up there for that rally at their own expense. The groups that sponsored that, Oil and Gas Accountability Project, Sierra Club, there's groups out there that can help you in our DC. We're all in this together. You can learn from what I've been through, and I can learn from what you're doing. We're all in this together, and we have to get together. What I just showed you is going to happen here. You may not notice it tomorrow. You may not notice it 5 years from now. You may not notice it 10 years from now. But it will happen. How many people just moved here? How many people have lived here? How many is this second generation? Third generation? Sounds like to me like y'all don't leave. You're going to be handing this down to somebody, right? Somebody's got kids and grandkids. So the mess that you make for them, they're going to be living with. So, you can either decide to work together, you can decide to do something about it, or what happened in Dish and other places around the country is going to happen here. And you can grab your PowerPoint slide, and I'll see you in California in a couple of years when we're out there doing a presentation like this out there, and you can tell them how they screwed up your town. You can tell them how you had to move. Me coming here is a wasted trip if you don't get involved. I don't know what happens here in this community on a Friday night, but it seems like there's a pretty good crowd out here. So there must be some interest in this. Get involved. I'm sure there's sign-in sheets out here. Figure out what you can do to help. I don't get paid to do this. I work a full-time job. I have a family. I have a nonprofit organization that I'm involved in. You can do something to help this. When I began to speak out against the oil and gas industry, first off, I was the only local official in the state of Texas doing this. Nobody else was speaking out. That was like taboo to speak out against the oil and gas industry. But I didn't stop. What they were doing was wrong. What happened to us shouldn't happen to anybody. I served 8.5 years in the military to defend our freedom. And that happened to me. So I didn't quit. I kept speaking out. There were many nights when I laid awake wondering what was I going to do. Because once you start speaking out, you get the whole community behind you. Now all of a sudden, they expect results. What was I going to do? So I kept at it. There's many meetings I walked away licking my wounds. But there were others where I started to make progress. Started to get a little media coverage. Some guy named Josh Fox showed up one day. Did a little video. You guys seen that? All of a sudden, people were listening to us. Some of the air regulations in Texas, unfortunately, they only apply to the Barnett Shale, were because of what we did. One person can make a difference. I believe I did make a difference. So if you're sitting out there and you're thinking, this is a mammoth industry. This is truly David versus Goliath. There's no way I can make a difference. Anybody ever remember who won that? I'm going to put up some contact information. Oh, this is a quote. Obviously, you guys have probably figured out I like quotes. This is from Theodore Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. That's a pretty powerful quote. I really like that quote. So the question is, are you going to get in the arena? Which one of those are you going to be?